Our next speaker is Ernesto Mifano Honigsberg. Ernesto is a PhD candidate in literature and cultural studies at the University of São Paulo. His research is on Yiddish literature in Brazil and Yud Lamed Peretz's play By Nacht auf den Alten Mark. He also directed the documentary When Tango Meets Klezmer about his grandparents, Ernest Honigsberg and Rosa Porozowska, klezmer musicians. His paper is entitled Yiddish on the Road, The Literary Worlds of Brazil's Peddler-Writers.
Thank you, Michael. Schönen Dank. Samechai zu sein da. Thank you, everyone. I'm happy to be here. So I'll talk a little bit about this research on a part of my research I'm carrying on Yiddish writers in Brazil, and I'll focus mostly on this writer, Meir Koczynski, and specifically about this book, Nusach Brasil, Brazilian Style or Write, that was published in Israel in Verlag publisher Yud Lamed Peretz in Tel Aviv in 1963. So, 1 second. Imagine a man walking along a dirt road in the interior of Brazil. The heat is heavy. Dust clings to his clothes. Across his shoulders, he carries bundles of fabric. He walks from house to house, selling on credit, negotiating prices, waiting for payments that may never come. He speaks in an hybrid language, Yiddish shaped by Portuguese, or perhaps Portuguese bent by Yiddish, improvising as he goes. Tomorrow, he will walk again. This figure, known among Jewish immigrants as the Klientelchik, the door-to-door peddler, was not fictional. For thousands of Eastern European Jews who arrived in Brazil in the 1920s and 30s, peddling was the primary entry into the economy, and it became a central literary figure in Yiddish writing produced in Brazil. Here, I argue that in Koczynski's writing, the Klientelchik is not only a character, but a structuring principle, a paradigm for understanding the diasporic operation of Yiddish in Brazil. The conditions of peddling, mobility, negotiation, linguistic improvisation, and precarious belonging shape narrative form, language, and even the institutional position of Yiddish literature in Brazil. The Klientelchik has no fixed workplace. His labor depends on entering other people's spaces. He moves between thresholds, social, linguistic, and economic. Trust is provisional. Payment is deferred. Belonging is partial. Koczynski lived this condition. Born in 1904 in Włocławek, Poland, he arrived in São Paulo in 1935, after imprisonment and political persecution in Eastern Europe. Like many immigrants without capital or local networks, he became a Klientelchik. At the same time, he wrote in Yiddish, stories, essays, criticism. Even after leaving peddling behind, the experience continued to shape his literary imagination. He was not the only one. Adolfo Kishinevsky is another writer that followed a similar path in Brazil, combining itinerant labor and literary production. Another one yet was Anatol Rosenfeld, a very well-known theater critic in Brazil who shared the pattern of early peddler work for over 10 years, followed by cultural mediation within Brazilian intellectual life. Together, these figures illuminate a broader pattern in which unstable work and cultural production emerge from the same conditions of migration and circulation. What distinguishes Koczynski is not that he wrote about peddlers. It is that he wrote Brazil into Yiddish. His fiction unfolds on Brazilian roads, in rural settlements, in peripheral neighborhoods. Brazilian characters populate his stories: clients, officials, domestic workers, housewives. Portuguese enters Yiddish for practical necessity. One of the clearest expressions of this appears in his book, which I just showed, Nusach Brasil, Brazilian Style, from 1963, which includes a glossary of over 100 Brazilian terms rendered in Yiddish. These are not incidental borrowings. Portuguese words are transliterated into Yiddish script. Verbs are formed by attaching Yiddish endings to Portuguese roots. Local expressions acquire new semantic weight within Yiddish syntax. Koczynski refers to this incorporation as Brazilianism. They should not be understood as simple lexical borrowing, but as a practice of internal translation. They mark the moment when diasporic language encounters an environment that exceeds inherited semantic frameworks. They arise from practical need. Brazilian experience is irreducible to inherited European categories, but they are also stylistic choices. The presence of Brazilian terms mark the text as geographically and socially situated. It refuses to smooth difference away. Writing here becomes an act of translation carried out from within, under conditions of work. A revealing example appears in a scene where a Brazilian domestic worker sings while she works. The song is transcribed in Yiddish letters, yet keywords remain in Portuguese, preserving their sound and rhythm. Whether the song corresponds to a specific identifiable regional matters less than the literary gesture. Brazilian oral culture enters Yiddish prose as audible presence. Language stretches in order to hold what it encounters. The road in these stories is equally complex. It is physically demanding. Heat, distance, fatigue are real constraints. Bodies collapse under weight and sun. But the road is not only deprivation. It is also exposure to difference, discovery, and learning. In a 1956 essay called Social Dynamism and Literary Staticity, Kuczynski criticizes local writers for failing to engage fully with Brazilian social realities. Yet, he does not romanticize victimhood. On the contrary, he insists that the life of the clientelchic contained elements of intellectual curiosity and even freedom. Walking through unfamiliar landscapes, negotiating with strangers, learning new codes. These experiences expanded perception. This ambivalence structures the stories themselves. In one narrative, a Brazilian installment peddler named Nochem is worn down by relentless walking, consumed by the physical and psychological toll of chasing economic stability that never quite materializes. In another, Yerachmiel is caught selling goods beyond the limits of his license, exposing how survival depended not only on effort, but on negotiating bureaucratic arbitrariness. In yet another story, Avram makes a living selling Catholic holy images, saints, Madonnas, even reproductions of the Mona Lisa, presenting them strategically as Our Lady of Beauty. His success relies on his ability to read Brazilian devotional culture with precision and to translate it into persuasive speech. Commerce here requires intimacy. Flirtation, familiarity, and cultural literacy become economic tools. The clapper is not merely a trader of objects, but an agile interpreter of social codes. Credit structures these exchanges. Installments generate both loyalty and risk. The semantic shift of the Yiddish word tzvok from nail to bad debtor emerges from concrete local practice. Peddlers market door frames of unreliable clients with a small nail. Language records economic experience. Here, circulation becomes central. The clientelchic does not accumulate, he moves. His stability lies in repetition, not possession. The logic stands to writing itself. As Roni Citernovich observes, the Yiddish writer occupied a structurally similar position, circulating cultural production without stable institutional support, addressing a limited and fragmented readership. Brazilian Yiddish literature was peripheral both within Brazilian society and within the broader Yiddish world. Writers operated as double outsiders, socially marginal in Brazil, geographically distant from major Yiddish centers, and isolated in their own Jewish communities. Kuczynski's trajectory through anthologies reflects this condition. He participated in collections such as Unser Beitrag, Our Contribution, from 1956, self-published by Brazilian Yiddish writers, and Brasilianisch, or Brazilian, published in 1973 by Argentinian Zivo collection Musterwerk von der Jiddischer Literatur. If in the anthology of 1956, Kuczynski expressed frustration with the limited engagement of Brazilian Yiddish writers with local realities, Nearly 20 years later, his tone shifted. He acknowledged the modest scale of production, yet emphasized its distinctiveness and legitimacy. Brazilian Yiddish literature might be peripheral in volume, but not in experiential depth. Its instability became its defining condition. The tension between negotiated presence and fragile continuity becomes even clearer when we move from the road into the house, where also he stages some revealing conflicts. How much time I still got? Just
5 minutes.
5 minutes? Okay, thank you. So this is the case of the tale The Actor and the Professor, Der Akteur und der Professor, a story which centers on the figure of Michel Lipkes, known as the soul of the Yiddish theater, an aging Yiddish actor who has devoted his whole life to art. For decades he toured, performed, rehearsed, collected reviews, saved photographs, preserved programs. His cultural labor accumulated materially in a trunk, heavy, full, carefully kept. The trunk contains the material residue of a life lived in Yiddish performance. Lipke's son, named Fabio, embodies another trajectory. He's a successful Brazilian doctor, fully integrated into middle-class society. He does not read Yiddish. He does not inhabit the theatrical world that defined his father. The trunk, filled with papers in an inaccessible language, appears opaque to him, an inheritance without use. Here, the generational fracture is linguistic before it is emotional. The distance between father and son is not primarily conflictual. It is structural. Yiddish no longer organizes the son's social world. Professional success in Brazil has required other forms of integration. After Lipke's death, the family slowly realizes that the materials preserved in the trunk possess cultural value, not for them, but maybe for other Jews. The archive is eventually sent abroad and incorporated into an institutional framework. Recognition occurs, but elsewhere, through the hand of evil, an institution that the family did not previously know. Preservation, however, does not guarantee transmission. When Lipkes appears in archival footage on Brazilian television, dressed in the roles he once performed, sometimes as a poor car driver, sometimes as a Hasidic Jew, his family reacts with extreme discomfort and prohibits the circulation of the images. These images threaten the social respectability they have achieved. What for Lipkes represented artistic devotion appears, in the new context, as an embarrassing reminder of immigrant marginality. The father's cultural labor is validated institutionally but unsettled domestically. At this point, Kuczynski introduced a subtle but powerful reversal. Within the household, the housemaid becomes the only person capable of understanding fragments of Yiddish. Through years of employment in Jewish homes, she has absorbed the language informally, by listening, repeating, and inhabiting domestic proximity. Meanwhile, younger members of the Jewish family have lost its fluency. The woman, positioned at the lowest rung of Brazil's racial and class hierarchy, becomes a mediator of meaning inside a Jewish household, not because she was formally educated in Yiddish, nor because she was integrated into Jewish institutions, but because language traveled through labor. Placed alongside Lipke's trunk, this reversal sharpens the story's stakes. In both cases, cultural continuity is unstable. The archive evidences that the familial transmission fails, while, on the other hand, fragments of the language persist in an unexpected body. Cultural continuity does not follow predictable lines. Inside the house, as on the road, work structures language. The baleboste, or housewife, controls purchasing decisions. The empregada, the domestic worker, mediates communication. The clientelte negotiates both. These encounters reveal layered hierarchies: immigrant, Brazilian, Jewish, Black, middle class, precarious. Yiddish circulates within these asymmetries. Across these narratives, the Yiddish cultural worker occupies a position that is never fully secured. He operates between worlds, economically, socially, or linguistically. The same applies to the literature itself. Brazilian Yiddish writing never consolidated into a dominant institutional center. Yet, it developed forms capable of registering precisely this condition. To return to the thesis, in Koczynski's work, the klientelczyk is not only a character drawn from immigrant life, it is a model for understanding how Yiddish functioned in Brazil. It functioned through adaptation without full assimilation, through presence without complete incorporation. Across Koczynski's writing, then, labor is not background, it is a form. Movement shapes narrative. Linguistic friction shapes style. Economic stability shapes literary circulation. That's why Yiddish in Brazil does not settle. The road remains unfinished. The klientelczyk keeps walking. The actor's trunk is kept in an archive, impossible to be exhibited. The domestic worker holds fragments of a language that's not officially hers, and the writer keeps translating the word he sees into text. What persists is movement, of goods, of words, of stories, across an uneven terrain. And it is there, on that unstable road, that Yiddish in Brazil was at work. That's it. Thank you.